Hello and happy Friday, and thanks for tuning into RadioFreeRhinecliff.org. And this show in particular, correct me if I'm Norm, I'm your host, Norm. I'm thrilled to be here tonight with Pete Veru. Pete, thanks for coming.
How are you, Norm? It's always great to see you.
I'm pretty good, thanks. Where are you from?
I presently live in Boulder, Colorado.
And why? Why are you in Boulder, of all places?
I moved out there in 2010 to begin my PhD in history at the University of Colorado in Boulder.
2010. So you've been there, I'm just going to do the math here, that's like 7 years. See if the listeners are actually listening. So you've been there a long, long time, and you finished your PhD.
I did in 2018.
And, this is why I was thrilled to have you on the show. We've been friends for like 30 years, and I've watched your life and the shit that you've done, and it's all just amazing. It's an amazing story.
Thank you.
But let's stick on this for a second. What was your dissertation on?
Well, basically, it's common knowledge that the French gave us a tremendous amount of financial aid during the American Revolution. My work's about how we paid them back.
Okay.
And that story runs through Amsterdam in the Netherlands during the 18th century, in the country that's now called the Kingdom of the Netherlands, but at the time was called the United Provinces, the largest republic in the world.
Okay. Yes. So tell me again, they loaned us money for the...
They did a lot more. They not only loaned us money, they invested tremendous amounts of money in our own depreciated securities, which pumped a whole bunch of cash into a, frankly, depressed economy that was in the United States during the 1780s, and basically set off the first peacetime economic expansion in American history.
Okay, so this is the War of Independence. So this is,
yes.
What are the dates we're talking about?
Well, the dates of my work start in 1780 when John Adams, after he got kicked out of France, went to the United Provinces to borrow money. The United Provinces was I don't know how, if you wanted to borrow money, if you were a sovereign nation, you went to Amsterdam to borrow money. They had 400 million guilders to lend out.
Why did they have so much money?
Because they had a very successful golden age that went from, say, 1600 to 1750. And all this money had been accumulated, and they passed the money down to their...
But what were they doing that got them all that money?
They had gotten into the spice trade. They had gotten into the slave trade, unfortunately. They had all these trading posts and trading empires all over the world, including where we're sitting right now, when it was called New Netherland.
In Kipsbergen.
Kipsbergen, yes. All of those are Dutch names. All the names around here are Dutch. And they had accumulated a fortune by sailing around the world. South Africa only exists because they needed a place to resupply their ships on their way to Indonesia, where they were trading for spices.
It only exists, but certainly there were people there before.
There were people there before. There were people there before. They just set up these colonies, and more people went down there. They were all growing food to put on the ships so that the Dutch ships could get all the way to the rest of the world. They had colonies in Brazil. You know the old expression, the sun never set on the British Empire.
Yeah.
Same thing for the Dutch Empire at its height. So they accumulated all this money.
Well, let me just keep digressing here.
Sure.
When did the Dutch Empire wane and the British Empire gain prominence?
The thing is, this is a country that only had, at its height, 2-3 million people when there was 5-6 times that amount of people in France and in England. So they never really had a chance to. They were a world power only because they had all this money, and they built the Dutch Golden Age. It's basically this marvelous intersection of tolerance, capitalism, art, and Republican government. It wasn't hard to get people to go there, and those people that went there had a lot of knowledge.
And what kind of tolerance did they have that made them noteworthy in the rest of the world?
If you whatever you did behind closed doors, they didn't care.
And the rest of the world was like, no, you can't do that.
Well, let's put it this way: whenever the Iberians cracked down on their Jewish populations, the people in Amsterdam were the government of the United Provinces was like, "Why don't you come here? We don't care what you do."
Right.
As long as you don't build a massive synagogue, we really don't care what you do.
But if you did build a massive synagogue, that would run afoul?
Problematic. I wouldn't say that it was going to get you killed, but it was problematic.
Right. Interesting.
Yes, this is a Calvinist nation that allowed people freedom of conscience.
Right.
That's how it worked.
But sounds like maybe you weren't necessarily happy if people were sort of flaunting that in the streets.
That's exactly right. So if you were a Quaker and they loved to flaunt their religion, none of these places was a good place for you.
No, they don't, do they? Do the Quakers
absolutely.
really love to flaunt their religion? I had no idea.
In New Amsterdam, the people that annoyed Peter Stuyvesant the most were Quakers who insisted on praying in the middle of the street.
Huh.
Exactly.
No idea. Okay, so you wrote your dissertation on the Dutch role in lending money to the efforts for the colonies to gain independence from England.
Not exactly. After the war was over, we were deeply, deeply in debt, and France wanted to get paid back badly. Right. So the only people that had this kind of money were the Dutch. So John Adams went over there. He conducted what could only be described as an investor relations campaign in the Dutch newspapers and sold these Dutch people on the Americans, who they really didn't know anything about.
So sold them on the Americans as a good investment. Lend us this money. You know, we're going places. We're going to do great. Our stock's on the rise.
Basically, the way he did it was he created a new American. He had the Massachusetts Constitution, which he wrote, like when he had gone back to the United States. What did you do this summer? Oh, I wrote the Massachusetts Constitution. He had the Bank of North America's charter published in the Dutch newspapers. Oh, banks. We use banks here. That's something that makes sense to me. They have a Republican government. Oh, that makes sense to me too. He had Ben Franklin's Rechartering of the Philosophical Society published in the Netherlands. Oh, these people aren't just some dumb farmers. They think about things like science and philosophy. Isn't that wonderful?
Uh-huh.
So all this stuff happens, and the Dutch are like, okay, great, but we're not going to lend you this kind of money until our government recognizes you. And after the Battle of Yorktown, months afterwards, pressure began to build. Once it started hitting the newspapers in the Netherlands that the English had had enough of the war, all of a sudden the stadtholder decided to recognize the United States.
And what was the Battle of Yorktown?
When?
What?
It was basically the George Washington's army, with the French help, trapped the British on the James Peninsula. And that was the end of it. Cornwallis surrendered. He was now a prisoner. And there was just no way the British could win. So they said, okay, that's enough.
So that looked good.
Yes.
The Americans, the colonies, looked like a winning team.
It was.
And the folks in Holland were like, oh.
Yeah. Maybe these guys can win. Maybe these guys can do something.
And so John Adams, you said he conducted this like huge sort of advertising campaign in the newspapers and stuff. Did he actually take out ads?
No, he just wrote op-eds in a newspaper called the Leiden Gazette, which was effectively the paper of record at the time. The New York Times of its day.
The Leiden Gazette?
Yes.
And so I know you went there.
I did for 2
years. For 2 years to study this stuff.
Yes. Yeah.
And was all the original stuff in English?
No, none of it was in English. The Leiden Gazette, by the way, was in French. But the Dutch newspapers were in 18th century Dutch, which I had to learn to read these things. I learned enough to do the translations.
And this is which is why my jaw drops all the time, because I know you. I'm like, oh yeah, Pete Veru, whatever. But all of the things you've done is just fucking amazing. So you learned French for this,
enough to do some of the.
And you learned Dutch,
yes.
But then found that a lot of the stuff was in Old Dutch.
Yeah.
So then you had to learn that as well.
I had to get an 18th century Dutch dictionary is what I had to do.
Okay. And was that so? That even that sounds like a chore.
Yes, but in the 17th century, the version of the language is completely different from the 18th century version of the language, which is sort of different from the modern version of the language. So this language has had quite a lot of changes, evolution.
Right.
It had a German era, it had a French era, it had an Anglo-Saxon era. So kind of a bunch of different stuff. And by the way, Afrikaans, what they speak in South Africa, is basically 17th century Dutch.
Interesting.
Probably exactly what was spoken in this area in the 17th century and 18th century.
Right. This area 16. We just drove in and said, welcome to Kipsbergen.
Yeah.
And what does that mean in Dutch?
Chicken Mountain.
Chicken Mountain.
Yes.
That's good. And
is chicken, Berge is mountains.
Chicken Mountain.
Yeah. I don't get it.
I think maybe it was somebody's name or something.
Okay, so maybe there's a Chicken Mountain. There are no mountains in the Netherlands, but I don't know how it came about.
Yeah, Chicken Mountain.
Yes.
So I like that a lot. And 1686 is the date on the sign here.
Yes, that was after the handover, probably 20 years after the bloodless handover of New Amsterdam to the British.
Okay.
But basically, New York and all this place was still a Dutch town. They had translators, Dutch translators in the New York City courts until about 10 years after the American Civil War.
Okay.
Teddy Roosevelt spoke English, but Teddy Roosevelt's grandparents, they spoke Dutch.
Right.
Rosenfield, they're from the Netherlands.
Uh-huh.
Both sides of the family.
Okay, so back to your dissertation.
Yes, sir.
You wrote this about how John Adams went and sort of raised money to pay off the French.
Yeah, there's a first part of this.
Leaning on the colonies.
That's right. And by the way, heading towards revolution, violence broke out in France in 1788 in the rural sections. It was only until the 1790s that it broke out in Paris. But this money they needed back because the country was headed for bankruptcy and revolution. So John Adams, his work, they sold his work was what sold the first 3 deals. But to really do the heavy lifting, a guy in the Netherlands named Peter Studnitsky wrote the first research report on the United States, all in Dutch. And that was what sold the rest of the deals that went on from 1786 to 1794.
The first research report. Now I'm thinking of, sort of like traders today. They all have these analysts who are looking at stuff. That's the thing?
And I translated that research report.
And how do you know it's the first research report?
Because they were the only ones doing it, and they're the ones that wrote it. Here's something that is perhaps going to surprise people. America's first bankers were violent radicals trying to overthrow their own government. 2 brothers named Jacob and Nicholas von Staphorst. Peter Studnitsky worked for them.
Okay. Care to expand on that?
Yes. The American Revolution spurred another revolution in Holland. It was called the Patriot Revolution.
Uh-huh.
And in 1787, one of America's bankers, Jacob von Staphorst, was cashing weapons for a revolution. The stadtholder called on the Prussians to invade the country. They did. They went to von Staphorst's home and found a whole bunch of weapons, and he fled to Paris, where he remained until 1795. These weren't guys walking around polite Dutch society.
The bankers.
Yeah, while shoveling bags of cash out to wide-eyed revolutionaries out a back door. They were the revolutionaries, and they didn't really care who knew about it.
How come?
They wanted to get rid of the English associated stadtholder.
Okay.
He was like the prince of the republic. They wanted to get rid of him. They thought of him as a British lackey.
Not one particular stockholder, just
Stadtholder.
all the English associates.
They wanted to get rid of all English influence within the country, and that was getting rid of the stadtholder first. The Orange Party, the House of Orange.
Why do they want to get rid of the English?
There was no constitution in the country. They wanted a constitution, a guarantee of rights.
In Holland?
Yes.
But why do they want to get rid of the English?
Because the English did not want the Dutch to have a constitution. They wanted them to have a king or a prince, in this case. And they didn't want them to have a constitution.
No, they wanted them to continue to be a monarchy, as they were.
A republic headed by their guy.
Okay, I see.
Yeah.
I see. So they wanted it to be and so just as the colonies wanted the English out, so the Dutch wanted them out.
And when the Americans had been successful, all of a sudden the Dutch are like, well, if this crowd who doesn't even have any money
right.
can beat the English. Why can't we?
And so was there some promise? Was there sort of a hiring of the American revolutionaries to like come to Holland and show us how you doing it?
No, because the revolution that happened ultimately in 1795 for the Dutch Republic was not really the same thing at all. It was really just a kind of a change of government. And it wasn't like, yes, they chased out the stadtholder, but the basic framework, which is what the Americans didn't have, was still there. It just needed to be changed. The framework needed to be changed. We needed to invent a government in the United States.
Right.
And that's what happened. But in the Netherlands, it was different. A lot of moving parts, man.
My head is spinning.
A lot of moving
parts.
parts.
I remember now, how I became a good draftsman, doodling in history class. Mind wandering, just doodling and like
blah, blah, blah,
cartoons
blah, 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 blah,
yeah,
blah, blah.
I never paid attention to any of that shit. But you did. And
yes.
Were you into it when you were in high school and junior high and all that stuff?
Not really. I was an institutional junk bond trader for 17 years.
In high school?
No. And when I had started the junk bond department at the Toronto Dominion Bank, and I was reading the Wall Street Journal at 7 o'clock in the morning, and I got to the back page, and at the back page, they always had a review of a history book. And one of the books that they reviewed was called Inheriting the Revolution.
I've never heard this story.
Yeah, and that's right. I don't think I've ever told you. Inheriting the Revolution. So it was written by a wonderful history scholar named Joyce, the late Joyce Appleby, who was ultimately the head of the American Historical Association. And I said, this would be an interesting book to read. I'll read this on the weekend. Well, let me tell you, I got halfway through the first chapter, and I said, I have no idea what this lady's talking about. Now I got to go back and start. And that's when the rabbit hole opened up.
You got to start researching to figure out when she refers to this or that, what are these things?
Right. And down the rabbit hole I went.
God.
And down the rabbit hole I went. I was also playing in a band at this time. That gets complicated. The long story short, I never finished the book until I was a first-year master's student at George Washington University. Okay. I wrote it up for a professor of mine.
But you got the bug, that book and the rabbit hole and going down there and doing more
I just
more
started
research.
Consuming everything history on TV. I was consuming audiobooks. I couldn't get enough. It
and
was
you found this thing that you were indifferent to and your primary education all of a sudden was sort of doing it for you.
Kind of the story of my life.
Where else in your life is that phenomenon present?
Well, I never knew anything about music.
Oh, yeah.
And then I started playing guitar, and next thing I know, I wrote a few songs, and next thing I know, I'm playing in a band. Next thing I know, I had a record in every record store in the country.
Yeah. Now, and I've known you through all that. When I met you, you were working at,
yes.
Not at TV,
Bear Stearns. Yes, may rest in peace.
Yeah. And selling high yield bonds.
Trading,
there.
yes.
Trading high yield bonds. And then you got hired away to Toronto Dominion to start their high yield.
Yes, that's right.
Euphemistically called the junk bonds.
Right, that's exactly right.
And why are they junk bonds? More high yield? Why are they
were
called this?
It's difficult to think about it this way, but at that time the business was very stodgy. In the 1980s, the business was very stodgy. Yeah, I can lend money to AT&T and IBM, but what is this? MCI? What are they? Some sort of cellular telephones?
Right.
I never even heard of this. Who ever heard of, giving money to a bunch of people that don't even have any revenue yet? Yes, I know they have to build out the network and they have to raise money to do that, but they have a pretty good idea.
And did you handle MCI?
I traded some of those bonds early in my career, but this guy Mike Milken showed up.
Yeah.
And he developed an entire market to give ideas, to capitalize ideas instead of ongoing companies.
Okay, I've got ideas. How can I get some money for my ideas?
Yes, well,
because the French are leaning on me, and the Dutch have already loaned to me.
Yeah, the French were leaning on the United States too.
Yeah.
It was getting ugly.
So back to Mike Milken, what did he come up with?
This idea that these young growth related companies needed money, and if I could explain the story to insurance companies and mutual funds, they might lend these people money.
They might want to divert some of their conservative investments into this riskier,
you got it,
junkier,
you got
but
it,
also potentially higher yield investment.
You got it.
Huh. Wow. All right, I'm going to retire. I'm going to retire now.
That's exactly what happened.
And how did you get into that?
I think I read an article about Mike Milken once, and I got a job as a clerk at Bear Stearns, and I got hired by this really fat guy named Al Schlesinger, kind of guy that was just a swashbuckling, trading.
Is he still with us here in this Mortal Coil?
He is still with us. My first job was to get him his food. Let me tell you what that entailed. For breakfast, he had two ham and cheese on rye. That was breakfast. For lunch, he'd have two falafels with sauce on the side, a bag of popcorn, and a bag of potato chips. Around 3:30. He'd have like a slice of pizza.
But also, let me just say, because it is radio, you're holding your hands like 3 feet apart when you say bag.
Big bags. He once said to me when I went to get my own lunch, I got a tuna sandwich and a little bag of chips. He looks at me, he goes, "If you ever come back with a small bag of chips again, I'll fire you." I said, "You got it, Al, no problem."
Love that.
He also used to wipe his dried mucus on the computer screen. I had to clean that off too. This was not, this was not the glamour position, and there was only about 1,000 guys that wanted that job, by the way.
Right.
So this is not like the modern workforce here. I mean, I was working 12 to 15 hours a day
for this guy,
cleaning
the mucus off of his
and doing
monitor
everything else,
and buying big bags of chips.
Anything.
What kind of chips did he like? Do you recall?
Cape Cod chips. Oh, remember those Cape Cod chips?
They still have them.
Yeah. So that's what
and
he
did. I happen to know they call the big size the party size.
Well, he was all about the party. And by the way, after trading a couple of $100 million worth of securities a day for a week, he'd go down to Atlantic City to gamble. I'm like, haven't you had enough? No, I love this stuff.
Right. Huh. And so so you're a grunt, you're bringing him coffee and huge bags of chips. How did you advance?
Well, pretty much what ended up happening is people ended up leaving. They went and took other jobs, and then all of a sudden it's like, well, we need to raid the farm system now. We need to bring the shortstop up from the farm system.
So what were you learning in the farm system while you're delivering the coffee?
Norm, it was so complicated in the beginning for me. It's such a difficult thing. Mostly what you have to learn is how to remember stuff. That's the critical aspect of it.
Do you have a natural ability for that?
Yes, I do.
And did you know that all through your education?
No, because at the time that you're doing it, you're drinking out of a fire hose.
Right.
There's so much information coming out. You feel like if you can remember one thing that happened yesterday.
But in high school, taking the SATs and all that shit, you didn't realize like, oh, right, I got a really good memory.
I was a terrible student in high school. I was very nervous. I had no confidence. I was a good tennis player. That's why I was able to go to college.
Right.
So that's what happened. And then
where was high school? Where were you?
I went to the Dwight Englewood School in New Jersey.
Englewood?
Yes, in New Jersey.
In Englewood, New Jersey.
In Englewood, New Jersey, and college was the University of Hartford.
And did you played tennis in high school?
I did.
And did you start off pretty good?
No, I really started very late. I really only started playing a lot when I was 14.
Did you have any interesting matches in, say, Montclair, New Jersey?
I shouldn't have told you this yesterday. I knew you were going to hit me with this. Well, in my senior year, I had attracted some attention from some schools, but I really hadn't hit my stride. And the coach said to me, the coach really didn't like me all that much. The kids on the team didn't really like me all that much. And the coach just one day said, listen, I'm going to try you at number 2 singles. I know you've never played higher than 5, but, I've watched you practice, and you seem to be hitting the ball well.
What the hell? Did the 4 people above you, get sick or something?
No, I just think that he thought, do you know what stacking is?
No.
Stacking is when you take your best player and you play him at number 2 instead of number 1 because their best player is going to beat them. And, I don't want to put our regular number 2 at number 2. I'd rather play him at 3.
I love this.
Basically, get in there, cannon fodder.
Yeah.
Yeah. I beat the kid in 3 sets.
Nice.
And
it's a best of 5 set thing?
3 in high school. It's best of 3 in high school.
Okay, so you beat him in 3 sets.
I beat him in 3 sets.
You won 2 and he won 1.
That's right.
Okay.
And the athletic director wrote it up. And wrote it up in their magazine, the athletics magazine.
At the high school.
At the high school.
Englewood,
and I showed it to the University of Hartford, who was interested in me, but was kind of on the fence. And they said, we'd like you to come. And
so there's an article about you that the athletic director wrote in the high school magazine, newspaper, whatever.
Not the newspaper, like the stuff they sent to alumni. And stuff.
Oh, I see. And you showed it to
the coach that was interested in me at the University of Hartford.
And were there other coaches interested in you?
Well, the guy at Texas A&M said to me, you can walk on if you want, but the guys, you're never going to play a match. And by the way, all the guys that are ahead of you don't even speak English.
Really?
Yeah, they're guys from Czechoslovakia. That's when there was, Yugoslavia, all these places. It was like, I'm getting the best players in the world to come play here is what I'm trying to tell you.
Right.
But I had a game that kind of was styled after Stefan Edberg and John McEnroe, and that was...
In what way?
Serve and volley.
Okay.
Not everybody did that. So that means that you could plug this kid in at doubles. So he's got some versatility. Not only is
this kid being you.
Yeah. And I was 6'1". I was a good enough athlete. So, doubles is a separate skill, as you know, Norm, being the tennis enthusiast that you are.
I am.
And they said, well, this guy, I can get different things out of him. So let's bring him on board. And that was my college thing.
And so you got a scholarship to the University of Hartford.
Yeah, I did.
To play tennis.
I did, yes. And I was captain in my junior year.
Amazing.
Yeah.
And what did you play there? Singles, doubles?
I played mostly what they would do is they would take the best singles player on the team and team them up with me as a doubles player. And most of these guys, they just didn't. Once you put them on a court to play doubles, they were lost. They looked like they were playing a different game.
So were you holding their hand, explaining to them,
this is what you do.
Here,
this
come
is what
here,
you
do that.
This is what you do.
Look for these angles.
Don't get caught here.
Right.
That kind of thing. And that's how we did it.
Yeah. And you had this serve, the American twist, is that what it's called?
Yes.
And when did that come? Can you explain what that is?
Most serves, when they hit the ball from a right-hander, the ball hits and moves to the left or straight.
Right.
If you hit the ball a certain way, you can have the ball bounce to the right. My right, the server's right.
So it comes curving in right to left, and then it bounces from left to right.
Imagine somebody throwing a snake at you and telling you to hit its head. It just looks like all this curve motion.
I have lined up against that serve. It's really difficult.
It's difficult.
Right.
And it also destroyed my shoulder. Thank you very much. But it was highly effective, especially in doubles, because you have time to come in and rush the net afterwards.
And also people probably sucked at returning it.
They were horrible. I made really good guys look foolish.
Right. Because they're not expecting it. And not a lot of people seem to hit that serve.
And I could hit it with remarkable consistency. It didn't matter if it was a first serve or a second serve. I'd hit it just as hard, just as effectively.
Right.
I had supreme confidence that I could get the ball in.
And what was your percentage of serves going in?
80, 90%.
So no reason to not hit your first serve for your second serve.
Sometimes I would hit my second serve harder just to mess with the guy.
Right. Well, managing expectations. That's a big part of it.
I can do it any time. Anytime you want me to do it, I can do it. And that was highly, highly effective. And I had a good first volley.
And amazing.
Yeah.
So you had a blast.
I really did. It got me through college. It taught me a lot about life. Taught me a lot about teamwork with another person, like that kind of thing. It taught me a lot about perseverance. You can't give up.
Right. And you must have been extremely popular with the young ladies at the University of Hartford at that time.
I do not recall, Senator.
But here's what I'm getting to. At one point, and I asked you if we could talk about this. At one point, you had your ears changed. Your ears stood straight out, according to you. I've never seen any photos of that.
Yeah.
But I know people like that.
Yeah.
I've seen people, and you had them pinned back or something.
Completely changed my life. Actually, it didn't change anything. It just changed my perception of myself.
Well,
instantly, the confidence went from, shy-ish, have to keep the hair really long to cover the ears and all this stuff.
Right.
And that turned around into something entirely different.
Amazing. And so you had that done. I'm guessing you were on
junior year.
Your parents' insurance plan and stuff or whatever.
I paid for it myself. My sister lent me the money, and then I paid her back.
Oh, she didn't? And what was it cost to get that done back in 1980?
I think it was $3,800.
And
1984-ish.
And again, we're in the radio. He's got lovely ears right now, in case you're wondering.
Thank you.
So you graduated from University of Hartford.
Yes.
Oh, wait, your shoulder. You said you hurt your shoulder.
Destroyed it. Yeah, destroyed it.
And so do you no longer play tennis?
I no longer play tennis. It just hurts too much. The racket feels like it weighs about 15 pounds.
I'm so sorry to hear that.
Yeah, it just destroyed it. I also have a herniated disc in my back because all my young career was played on hard court.
Right.
It's not like now where they play on the soft stuff. It was all hard court.
But now you play golf.
I do play golf. I love it. And unlike tennis, I get better when I play golf. Tennis, it's just going to get worse. It's not going to be as good.
That's funny.
Why can't I do this like when I was 18?
I feel like I keep getting better at tennis in my golf game, as you know.
Well, I appreciate your enthusiasm for the game, Norm.
Yeah, me too.
Yes.
It's fun to be that enthusiastic.
And I love hearing your analysis of your own game, which is just lovely to hear. Let me tell you the shot I hit, Pete.
Oh, my God. I mean, that's what I play for. I don't care about winning so much. I just want to hit the Sports Center shot.
Yeah, there's moments of glory. That's what you're looking for.
It is.
Yeah, you don't care what happens at the end of the book. You're looking for a chapter.
I don't think I do. A chapter, yeah. Well, books. You're writing a book right now, aren't you?
I am. I'm writing a book about, based on my dissertation. I got 2 articles published in academic journals.
Does the book have a working title?
Yes. It's called Bonds of Independence, John Adams, Alexander Hamilton, and the Dutch Connection.
Bonds of Independence. John Adams, Alexander Hamilton, whatever.
Yes, and the Dutch Connection.
Yeah.
Yes.
And how far along are you in that? So you're taking the dissertation you wrote, which I'm guessing was 300 pages or some shit.
240, 250.
Okay. And you're turning it into a book for mass market?
Yes. Well, mostly it's not certainly going to be an academic history, but the way I'm writing it, it's going to be, I think, accessible to a lot of people. It's got multi-dimensional characters.
Yeah.
It's not like a typical economic history. The guy that convinced the Dutch to buy up all the American bonds wasn't John Adams. John Adams didn't want them buying up the American bonds. And
I thought you just said he went there to sell that idea.
Hold on.
All right. I'll have another sip of this yummy cocktail.
Yes. There are 2 issues here. One is the primary market, where you go to Dutch customers and you say, I want you to lend money to the United States, and the money that they lend goes directly to the United States.
Uh-huh.
But see, the thing is that the United States had issued all of these bonds to its citizenry, and they were trading at 25 cents on the dollar because there really wasn't any money in the United States at this time. The price of those bonds had to rise, and there was nobody in the United States that could make them rise. So a fugitive from the United States, a guy named Daniel Parker, who had ripped off several people to the tune of $150,000. And let me tell you how much $150,000 is. When John Paul Jones presented his first budget for the U.S. Navy, the flagship was $150,000. It's basically the most amount of money you could spend on a man-made object at the time. Right. There wasn't a house in the United States that cost a fifth of that.
Right. Okay.
So this guy goes over to them.
What's his name again?
Daniel Parker.
And he's a big part of your book.
Huge part, and he is a wonderful character.
Oh, good.
He was at Bunker Hill with his brother.
Uh-huh.
He rips off these guys, including the U.S. government, for $35,000. He runs...
Which in today's money, I'm guessing, is like $8 million.
I think it's probably a lot more than that, although I really don't know. I really don't know.
Technically, it's a shit ton.
Yeah. He goes over there. He must have been a charming fellow because he's got Adams and Jefferson eating out of the palm of his hand. He goes and finagles a meeting with the 2 Dutch bankers. He says, do you know how much money you could make buying up American debt? And they're like, what American debt? The secondary debt trading in the United States? There's secondary debt trading in the United States? Yeah, John Adams didn't tell you? No, he didn't. Oh, okay. Well, let me tell you what happened. And he goes through it. They have a bunch of meetings among the the upper echelon of the investment community in the Netherlands, they write up this research report. They have their guy, Peter Stednitsky, write up their research report, and they send an agent over there with bags and bags of money, Dutch guilders. And they swoop up all of the depreciated debt and drive it through the roof, which of course makes everyone feel confident.
Right.
It brings all this money into the United States, kicks off the first peacetime expansion of the American economy in history.
Right.
And they did us a huge service.
Just amazing.
It's an amazing
Sounds so
story.
phenomenally interesting. And this guy, so you said he's a character. Are there stories swirling around him?
Yeah, tons of stories.
That didn't necessarily work their way into your sort of academic dissertation, but are working their way into this book.
Well, some things, like, this is a guy who fought at Bunker Hill. He couldn't go back to the United States because he would have been thrown in jail, which, by the way, debtor's prison wasn't really an oddity back then.
Right.
In an economy where there wasn't a lot of money, the British didn't want us to have money when we were their colonists. They just wanted us to buy goods on credit and ship raw materials to settle the accounts. So what need do you have of gold and silver, my friend? Just sit there and you're not allowed to trade with anybody else anyway.
Send us some beaver pelts.
Send us some tobacco. Send us some cotton. Send us whatever. But, you don't have any need for money. That's for your parent to use.
Right.
And that's why the bonds were so depressed. Basically, think of it as a tax. Basically, what the Continental Congress did was they bought goods and services from its citizenry with depreciating currency and depreciated bonds. And they bought all these goods and services at a huge discount.
Right. So what about John Adams? You're talking about him getting sent over there. Why was he sent? What kind of a character must he have been? A renowned salesperson or politician?
He wasn't at all. In fact, he hated the idea of money. He hated dealing with bankers. He thought it was very grubby. He just didn't like it at all, right? And the only reason he went over there to begin with was because the guy who was over there, a guy named Silas Dean, he was accused of financial malfeasance, and he was from Connecticut. So if you have a New Englander off the French delegation, you have to replace him with another New Englander because nobody in this country trusted each other at this time. You have to have a Southerner, you have to have a Mid-Atlantic guy, and you have to have a New Englander.
Whereas now everybody trusts each other.
I know. It's really unbelievable.
Yeah.
We live in such an era of good feelings.
So how far along are you in this book?
I'm 6 months away from finishing, I believe.
How long have you been working on it?
Oh, my God. Since I had to go back and finish the research because the book goes to actually the purchase of Louisiana.
Okay.
And that was the Dutch swan song in terms of their involvement with us. I wrote these 2 articles. I wrote a book proposal. I lost a lot of time. Other family issues got in the way. So I've been working on this since the time I graduated.
Which was how long
2018.
ago? Okay.
In May it'll be 5 years.
And so the book's going to find a publisher somewhere, probably some academic press, I'm guessing.
Yes.
And it's going to be released. It's going to turn out to be wildly popular.
I like that. I like the way you're thinking.
Thanks. And then what? What do you do then?
Well, I believe that this book would make a fantastic movie. If you think of The Big Short with Alexander Hamilton and a happy ending, that's the elevator speech. You don't need to go there.
Different kind of happy ending.
Different kind of happy ending, my friend. Then it makes a lot of sense.
Right.
It's if you see it as a Coen Brothers movie with a lot of quirky characters, it really makes a lot of sense.
Right. So who would play some of these characters? Because I'm available for Ben Franklin.
Oh yeah, I see it. I see it for sure. I see it. The philandering in Paris with the ladies.
I wouldn't know about that.
Yes, I know.
I have been to Paris though.
Yeah, I know you have. I know. I hadn't really gotten that far yet, but I really am just working on this book right now, and I have a lot of, I've got a lot of people that are interested, like people in the Ivy League that send me texts. There were 2 guys from the Atlanta Fed that wanted to know if they could cite my work in their book about the Bank of Amsterdam. They told me, you've got these fans at the University of Pennsylvania.
Amazing.
I did a visiting scholar gig at Yale. I did a visiting scholar gig at the Rutgers.
But your book, the dissertation, it gets out there.
Yeah.
And you have fans. There are also detractors, right?
There are a lot of people that believe that I'm exaggerating because none of them were junk bond traders. They have no practical, institutional, practical capital markets experience, first of all. Second of all, no American has gone over there and spent a year in the archives. None that can read Dutch.
Or Old Dutch. Or French.
A little bit of French. My French is kind of crappy, but I was fortunate enough to be there for 2 years. No one spent a year in the archives. I crawled around every place. I went to France. I went to England. I spent a year in the Netherlands just in the archives, away from even learning the language.
Right.
And when you crawl around that much, you start catching the stuff that other people missed.
So you take pictures of this stuff, the stuff you find in the archives?
Absolutely.
And so you've got proof. People are like, oh, you're exaggerating. You're like, well, no, look, read this.
That's
I'll
right.
Translate for you if you want.
But the clincher in regards to convincing these individuals, some of whom are stalwarts in the business, in my field, is not the fact that I can read some Dutch, not the fact that I have a PhD. It's the fact that I have 17 years on Wall Street. This is a second language to me.
So you're connecting the dots from that framework.
You got it. And that's the way I put it. That's right.
And they're not seeing those connections the way you are.
That's right.
And so they feel dumb.
Well, they feel like I read this other book and they contradict you, and therefore I'm going to believe them before I believe some kid like you. Some upstart, some up-and-comer.
Right.
And that's why it's all turned out. That's why. And by the way, as a historian, you got to welcome these attacks. You have to welcome these rejoinders, these criticisms of your work. That's incredibly important, and you should embrace it.
Why?
Because that's how you get better at this. Maybe somebody points out something you hadn't thought of. If you just dismiss everything out of hand, you have to track this stuff down. It helps your narrative to argue with these individuals.
Right. And it makes your argument stronger.
Much.
And so have these detractors found stuff where you're like, oh, fuck, you're right. I didn't see that.
No, but what they did do is present me with evidence that bolsters my argument without that I missed the first time around.
Okay.
Like in trying to figure out a way to explain this to them, I did more digging. I was like, wait a minute. I didn't know this existed. Wow. Thank you.
And so how much digging can you do now from over here and not sort of over in Amsterdam and environments?
I have a few connections at the City Archive at Amsterdam. That's important. And I often tap these individuals to, give me, I need this. Have you ever heard of this? Have you ever heard of that? But mostly I've read all the secondary work that's done on it, that's been done on my subject. I fell into this because I was in a diplomatic history class, and the professor said, what do you want to do for your research paper? I said, I don't know. I do some stuff with the Dutch. I do some stuff with the American Revolution. He goes, hey, you're one of these financial guys, right? I said, well, yeah. He goes, I always wondered about these Dutch loans. So when I read the secondary books that were available, I realized, well, I can do a better job than these guys. They're missing this, this, and this.
Amazing! Yeah. What a fabulous moment that must have been.
It was. I brought it to my advisor, who's a guy named Fred Anderson, who's one of the great colonial historians of his generation, and he said, strokes his beard, right out of central casting for a professor, beard, patches on the elbows. He's like, yeah. I think you're onto something here. So here's the thing. You're going to move to the Netherlands for a couple of years. I'll see you. I'll see you later.
Right.
Don't be a stranger.
Really?
And that's how it happened.
Just spectacular. And then when you graduated, after writing the dissertation and reading 1,000, 1,500 books or whatever.
It was a lot of books.
Again, technically shit ton, I think is the thing. At your graduation, Fred Anderson spoke.
He did. At my graduation, every PhD, every professor of their student, gives you a synopsis of what the guy wrote about. I got to tell you, that That speech he gave has been viewed like 4,000 times.
It's on YouTube.
It's on YouTube. I shared it on my Facebook page. Other people shared it because it was Fred Anderson's I was his last student. And it was an incredible honor, by the way, to be this man's last student.
Right. And his speech was so glowing.
I know. I was so humbled by it. So humbled by it. He's a dear friend, a dear colleague. None of this would have happened without him.
Right.
He believed in me.
Right.
He knew the story was good.
And so you had gotten a master's in American history.
Yes, at George Washington.
Uh-huh.
But my work was not anywhere about that.
What was your work there? What was your
I wrote
thesis?
the first academic history of the resonator guitar.
Which is what?
The dobro.
Oh, the dobro.
Yes.
What is that?
It was the 1920s mechanically amplified guitar predecessor to the electric guitar.
And why did they need amplification?
Well, Norm, you might be surprised to know this, but until rock and roll swallowed up everything else, among the most popular forms of music in this country were Hawaiian music.
Really?
Yes, and I don't mean Don Ho and a ukulele. I mean fretless string playing on your lap.
Uh-huh.
And it was so popular that the people that played them were like the star of the show, yet they were playing these old Martin guitars on their lap. Nobody could hear them.
Right.
So this one Hawaiian guitar player went to see these Czechoslovaks named Dopiera and said, "Can you figure out a way to make this louder?" And lo and behold, they came up with this idea to mechanically amplify a guitar from the Victrola. They had the Victrola arm has a little disc in it that magnifies, that amplifies.
It resonates.
Yeah, it resonates. And they took this disc, they just made 3 bigger ones, and they put it in this very heavy German silver, which is nickel guitar, and it was 7 times as loud.
Wow. And you said the Dopiera, were they like brothers or something?
We're brothers, or 3 brothers. 3 brothers, yeah. I think they're 3 brothers, yeah.
And so the Dopiera brothers.
Dobro.
Oh, that's where the name comes
Which
from.
also means good in Slovakian or Slovak.
Oh, isn't that funny?
Yes.
So dobro comes from the Dopiera brothers. They're the guys who invented this.
Yes, and
I didn't know it came from the old Victrola sort of.
That's right. And the molds to make these presses for these heavy guitars were made by this Swiss immigrant named Adolf Rickenbacker.
Another renowned.
Who in the late 1930s, because of the war, did not want to have a name that kind of sounded German. He changed it to Rickenbacker.
Rickenbacker.
Yes.
Interesting. Huh. So how did you get interested in dobros?
Oh, my God.
Resonator guitars.
Yes. In 1996, my roommate, who was a guy named Andrew Glacken, who was an incredible musician that I met at the University of Hartford.
Drew
Glacken. The late Drew Glacken, he died. Yeah. He was an encyclopedia of vintage guitars, and he was sitting on the couch in my apartment. I give him a place to live. Somebody called him and said, "I'm doing an assessment on a widow's collection of dobros." And Drew said, "How many guitars does she have? And he said, 65. Do you know anybody that wants to buy all of them at once? Because this woman does not want people, this is pre-eBay now. This woman does not want people coming through her house for the next year and a half.
Picking one here or two here or there.
They're cherry picking the best ones and leaving her with the. I did the research, made a bid, and bought them all. So now I have all these dobros, all these resonators.
Right.
That's how it happened.
Which puts you in pretty good position to write the first ever master's thesis on the history of the resonator guitar in America.
Yes, that's exactly
adding volume to Hawaiian bands.
Yes.
Go fucking figure.
Yes.
And prior to that, you were in a band yourself, weren't you?
At the same time, in 1990, I guess in the mid-90s, I started playing guitar. And at night after my job was done, and then I started writing music. And in 1998, I put a truly horrible version together of the band that ultimately became Feather Merchants. So what happened was Drew said, "Pete, we need to have a gig demo. If we're going to get gigs, we need to have a gig demo." I said, "Okay, where are we going to do that?" "We're going to go up to Hartford to a guy named Jim Chapdelaine." who is a producer and master guitar player. He made this demo, and one of the songs from the demo got picked up by a fellow named Frank Tadaro.
Oh.
To put in his movie Adult Above Freezing.
Right.
When they were going to release the movie to have the premiere, I said, Jim, your name's in the credits, so why don't you come down? We're playing, by the way, after the premiere.
Right.
So we played. Jim's standing there, arms crossed like they all do. And I got off stage. I said, what'd you think? You never know what's going to come back when you say, well, I think the songs are pretty good. The lead singer is serviceable. The bass player and the bass player and the drummer are terrible. And Drew was playing electric guitar. He was perfectly fine as an electric guitar player. I mean, if you ask Jim who's a good guitar player, you're not going to, the answer you're going to get is bass compared to him.
Right.
So I said, what would it take to get you to join the band? He said, you'd have to get rid of the bass player, the drummer, and move Drew over to bass. So I thought about it for about 20 seconds when I got home, and I fired the bass player.
And what were you playing?
I was playing guitar. Now, understand, Jim said he'd join the next day. They brought in a guy named John Peckman. We ultimately fired the lead singer after the first record was done, and we brought in a woman named Shannon Kennedy, who's a lovely woman to be with, to have in a band with. She's totally fun, totally cool. And the original bass player was Paul Asola from the Saturday Night Live band, but he was not a good live option. He was too busy. And we ended up with a guy named Jay Wiggin, who, in addition to being a great singer, bass player, was also a great singer. Now, but understand, Norm, that these guys had about 60 years of combined experiences playing in a band. Right. I had about a year.
Right.
So I had to get good fast.
So you were learning to play guitar.
And writing songs at the same time.
And then learning to write songs. And who was your teacher?
I worked with a guy named Mike Barry.
Right.
Whose first classical record cover was done by an unknown artist at the time named Norm Magnusson.
Go figure.
These two crows.
Wow.
Yes, and that was his album cover.
It was a beautiful album of classical guitar music.
Yeah, he was really a great player.
But he was your first teacher.
He was my first teacher.
And did he help you learn how to write songs too?
No. I think the rest of the band will tell you the reason that they like my songs is obviously I had no idea what I was doing. So
they didn't sound like everybody else's songs.
That's right. This guy's he's just making it up as he goes along. He doesn't know any of the rules. He's just doing. He's moving his hands up and down the neck. It's ridiculous, but somehow it works.
Interesting. So Feather Merchants.
Yes, it was Feather Merchants. The highlights, we played at South by Southwest. We played at the Seattle Film Festival. The last record was in the college top 200 for about 14 weeks.
What a blast.
We had 2 songs in films, one by Frank Tadaro, one by a friend of mine from Serbia.
Did you find any success abroad?
We had a following in South Africa, crazy enough.
How?
The woman across the hall, her sister came over to visit. She was a publicist. She said, why don't you give me a box of CDs to take home? Next thing I know, I'm doing radio interviews with guys in South Africa. We're getting written up in like the South African versions of People, Cosmopolitan, Esquire. These are publications we wouldn't get within 9 miles of in the United States.
Right.
Who? What? Forget it. You guys, I've never heard of you guys.
And somehow you took off in South Africa.
Somehow.
Just amazing.
We had a little following in South Africa.
I love that so much. Now, of all the things you've done, and we've gone through a bunch of them tonight, and I had the really been blessed to watch you do all of these things. And the most impressive thing is getting a band together and holding them together for all those years.
Yeah.
Just ridiculously difficult.
It's like dating 4 other people.
Yeah.
Okay. But really the thing is that everybody brought so much to the band that I wasn't worried about them. I was worried about me. Am I going to be able to remember the chords to my own songs on stage? That's what I'm thinking about.
Because you're working with these pros who know how to do that.
They're total pros. Total pros. We had a great run at Joe's Pub. We sold that place out twice in Manhattan. Yeah. We played all the clubs, and we played in New England down as far as Washington, D.C. We had a following. We had people that liked us. It certainly wasn't anything that was producing the kind of money you need to keep a band going.
Right.
But it was an experience I wouldn't trade for anything.
Yeah. Just amazing. And how many albums did you guys put out?
We put out 4 studio records, which included an EP, and we put out a live record, which came out in 2018, called A Pull from the Flask.
A Pull from the Flask.
The combination of shows we had done at the University of Hartford and shows we had done in New York.
Uh-huh.
All mixed and mastered by the marvelous Jim Chapdelaine.
And you still have the website up?
No, we moved everything to Facebook now.
Okay.
Feather Merchants, one word.
Feather Merchants, one word. And people can find your stuff on YouTube and
on Spotify, Apple Music, any streaming service we'll have.
Is there any chance we can hear some right now? I'm sorry, we didn't plan in advance. All right,
never mind.
Asking the tech geniuses here. So, are you still making music?
Yeah, I'm actually I'm working on new material with me as the lead singer, with some cats in Denver. These these young kids. I mean, I'm thankful that they like hanging around with me because I'm kind of like the elder statesman of the music business. And by the way, when Feather Merchants broke, this was the beginning of internet marketing for bands.
Oh boy!
So this was we were ground zero for doing that. And let me tell you, we pulled on every string,
right,
to market our band. We bought into every possible thing. But you know what, Norm? The fact is that at that time, probably even now, the record business is so corrupt that it was disheartening that you had to pay off DJs to get your music played.
Right.
Which is you'd have to go through an intermediary, but you really did.
Ugh. Amazing. So have you ever written any music about John Adams, say?
No, I didn't. But I will tell you I'll give you one song that I wrote. When I was living in Montauk after I left the business, I was going down
the
to the
junk bond business.
Yes, I was going down to the beach, and the Leslie Van Houten parole hearings were on TV, court TV. Somebody had court TV. Okay, and as I'm walking out, I stopped and I sat. I'll watch this for a second. Well, I was riveted. They went through the whole thing with him.
She was part of the Manson?
She was part of the Manson family. And I wrote Last Man on Earth, which was the title track from the last record we ever did.
Okay.
And I wrote this song about her involvement in the Manson murders.
Wow.
Yes.
Well, I want to hear that. And so, I mean, did you ever think? I mean, you must have considered writing some music about these things you've been studying and learning.
I once wrote a song about Walt Whitman's Crossing Brooklyn Ferry, the poem Crossing Brooklyn Ferry.
Right.
I wrote a song called Reptile Mind about the draft riots during the Civil War in New York City.
Right.
I wrote a song about that statue of William Seward that sits at the corner of Madison Square Park.
Sure. And so to this day, you play guitar almost every day?
Not every day, but my main instrument is this crazy tenor guitar that I kind of just adopted as my thing. I just gravitated towards that, but I do play a lot now.
And at one point you had a bouzouki.
I was playing bouzouki on the first record, but the lead singer, the Shannon Kennedy, it wasn't her thing, so I just dropped it. And
she didn't like it?
She didn't like it, and that's totally fine with me. I wasn't going to force that. That was just I just left that in the case.
And bouzouki, what is that exactly?
It is a
like
Greek
a
instrument. It's a Greek instrument, CFAD, tuned CFAD. It's a relative of the Turkish saz.
So 4 strings?
Double, 2-2-2-2.
Okay.
It became very popular in Irish music.
This Greek instrument.
Yeah, because they'd go down for their vacations during the 1930s and 40s and 50s, and they'd say, wow, I think I can use this for Irish music.
Amazing. And do they call it a bouzouki or do they rename it something more Irish?
Bouzouki, yeah.
That's great. Yep. You said it with a smile. And so your heritage is Greek.
I'm 100% Spartan, Norm. Both sides of my family are from Sparta. And not only that, according to my DNA, we've been there for like 10,000 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
And do you ever go there? You must have cousins.
Last time I was there was in 1971.
Wow.
And the flight that ultimately brought us there started as a botched 2-hour hijacking to Cuba.
So on like JFK Airport tarmac,
we were on the the TWA's inaugural 747 service from JFK to Rome. and then we were going to go to Greece.
And somebody tried to hijack it to Cuba.
Two Weather Underground wannabes tried to hijack the plane, but they talked about their plan before they got on the plane in front of a woman that was on the plane. She went and told the captain.
Sure.
He taxied around for about an hour and a half until the Federales could get their troops lined up.
Right.
Pulled back up to the gate. They came on, guns drawn.
Right.
Lifted these guys out of their seats and hauled them off the airplane.
Just amazing.
And just to tell you about the time this was, the captain's like, we're sorry for the inconvenience. The headphones will be for free now. You won't have to pay for the headphones. And the movie was Goodbye, Mr. Chips with Peter O'Toole.
Uh-huh. That's so funny. So you finally made it to Sparta.
Yeah. And
1971.
We're from a village called Anavriti, which is high in the mountains above Sparta. You could get there on a donkey.
Right. Right. Well, we have the song here. Can we play this? We can go over, right? Oh, good. We're going to play the song.
Okay, go ahead.
Right now. I love this so much.
Followed you home, got into your bed, you showed me around, and I met all your friends. I ran home and I said my goodbyes, for whatever they were worth. I was coming
All right, that was Last Man on Earth, the title track off of this album by the same name by Feather Merchants.
Yes.
The band began and founded and carried on by Pete Veru.
Yes.
And there was Shannon Kennedy.
Absolutely, lead singer.
Beautiful, beautiful voice. And what a gorgeous, beautiful song that is.
Thank you. Sometimes you get it right.
Yeah. Yeah, and it was fun to watch you listening to that. Do you listen to your old songs that often?
Once every 6 months, maybe, just to remember what it was like. More of it's a nostalgia thing. It always reminds me of my great friendship with these people who I love dearly.
Right, and you did all this work with.
All this work, spent hundreds of hours with them.
Rehearsing and playing out
in a
and
studio,
recording.
The amount of time that you spend together in a studio is just unbelievable.
Amazing. Well, this has been, correct me if I'm Norm, this has been my host, Pete Veru. And one last question I want to ask, Pete, because I've known you 30 years. It's been so much fun watching you live your life.
Thank you.
You know, from junk bond trader and tennis player to a musician and a band leader and an album creator and a master's candidate and a PhD candidate and all the things you've done. Such a treat watching that. When you look back on your life, you must have hopefully a great deal of satisfaction for the accomplishments.
I do.
Do you have are there regrets that stand out?
Not one.
Fucking A.
I believe that every regret's worth about 10 extra pounds.
I see.
You're just carrying around extra weight.
I think you maybe have one regret. Just saying. Kidding. A jab. All right. Well, everybody, thanks for tuning in. This has been so much fun to have Pete Veru here talking with us. And thanks to Patricia Wind and the Epicurean for having us here and for these other people here making it all possible. Have a fabulous Friday. Good night.